Hey guys, Onan here. Another day in the car, another rambling video from the brain of Onan. Someone on Twitter shared with me a video. It appears that it was shared by a set of occultists, so super traditionalist person. It was a clip of a sermon, and if I think of it, if you remind me, I'll put a link to the sermon in the description below. I don't think it was the entire sermon, um, but it was a section of a sermon by for sure a traditionalist and probably a set of a contest priest who basically was talking about how lust destroys faith. And I don't know if the priest defined lust in the sermon. Maybe it was in a part that wasn't recorded, but I doubt it. I think people disagree about what constitutes lust, and even the Catechism's definition. Um, if I think of it, I'll reference the Catechism section on lust, and I think lust, even defined in the Catechism, at least doesn't isn't the way that I would normally define it. I think of lust is sort of um, and not just fleeting thoughts, but like purposeful sexual thoughts about someone other than your spouse. Now, people will say you can lust against your spouse. I suppose I'm not sure that's lust, and maybe if it's just more of a disordered sexual appetite. I mean, I think people understand that you can't just be a sex crazed monster in your marriage just because you're married. But I don't know if lust is necessarily the best descriptor of that for someone that thinks and obsesses over sex with their spouse a lot, or if it's maybe it fits into a different category. But different people use, I would say, different points of reference when they're talking about lust. And I think a lot of people, especially traditionalists, kind of view lust as just any excessive, disordered, use the adjective you want, but an improper focus on sexual things, even if it's perfectly licit sexual things with your spouse. But and I suspect that's kind of what this priest was coming to. And the point of the priest video, as I understood it, was that lust destroys faith because it occupies your mind and takes away from it time that could be spent pondering the mysteries of our faith, pondering holy things, right? It was more that the time you spend with lustful thoughts is time that you are not spending doing other more holy, more virtuous things. And he more or less said that's why a lot of people lose their faith because they're spending their time on sexual things, bodily things, and not enough time on thoughts of God. And I don't know, maybe that's true. I think it's kind of true, but I approach it from a little different angle. No, actually, a different angle with two different reasons, and hopefully I can remember those reasons since I'm in the car. So the first reason is, especially if he's dealing with lust in a very broad way, and if it's just really any uh, excessive dwelling, thinking about sex. Okay, yeah. I mean, I wrestle with that all the time, and Catholic marriage makes it impossible not to. And I would just add to that, even if you're not thinking about those things and just about those things, most of us, myself included, spend a lot of time trying not to think about those things. So y these things come into our mind naturally and biologically. I'm convinced of that. I really don't. ascribe to the idea that it's all concupiscence and whatever. I think we're very biological, hormonal people, especially men, that sex is just often on our mind. And especially when sex is really not available when you would like or need it. And it's not enough to just not think about those thoughts. I think it takes active mental activity to suppress, push back, isolate, whatever word you want to use. But it takes active mental energy to push those thoughts at bay. So whether you're entertaining them or fighting them, the mental bandwidth is being occupied by these things. And these things are not, I mean, these things are just natural biological occurrences for a reasonably healthy man and woman, especially men. I'm convinced of that. So I think that, and I will wholeheartedly agree with the fact that if this is what he means, that the time and energy I spend and have spent trying to do battle with these thoughts absolutely has taken away from my ability and capacity to entertain other thoughts and virtues and whatever. It, it can be all consuming. And then I think a lot of people feel that way. It feels like you're in this constant battle, and all you're trying to do as as a Catholic man especially, is just to not to fall into sin. You could spend almost all of your free time and unfree time doing battle, trying not to fall into sin, which of course they would say you need to do that. And it's not like you can just control the thoughts and impulses and urges for the most part. And so you're going to be in this mental battle with that stuff. It's going to occupy your mental space whether you are just entertaining them or actively pushing them away. That much I am very convinced of that. That was an energy drink, not a beer. So so that to that extent, I actually agree with that. It's one of my main frustrations is that as Catholics, if you're going to, especially if you're not going to use contraception, and you're supposed to limit your sexual expression to the conjugal act, um, kind of nonstop damage control. It is for me. It actually segues nice to a poll I have running. Actually, I have two polls running on Twitter. So if you see this in the next day or so, you'll have time to go over to Twitter if you want to participate in those polls. The one question was if you could take a church approved pill. So the church says it's okay to take this pill, and if you take this pill, you and your spouse lose all sexual desire except when it's necessary for you to have children. Would you take that pill, or would you maintain the status quo? And um, I, I'm I'm a little surprised by the results, and I actually posed that to my wife. I was a little bit surprised by her answer. I'll probably do an episode on that after the fact, so I'm going to tease you a little bit on what most of you will probably be able to figure out how I would vote. But I'll tell you how my wife voted on that. And the reason I did that poll is for this very reason, that this phenomenon is is going to occupy a significant amount of your mental bandwidth if you are, especially, maybe not if, but especially if you're in a Catholic marriage where you're not using contraception and you're welcoming a lot of children into your life. This is baked into the process. So and it's in no small part because we are trying to do what the church says. We are not using contraception. We go uh, weeks at a time without having sex because we're trying to follow the church's teaching. And guess what? Those weeks are the hardest. when it comes to sexual thoughts, whether you call them lust or not. And so, just so we're clear, this this happens not because people are bad, but because people are good. Because Catholics are trying to follow these rules, and and I don't even think it, I don't think there's any evidence that Catholics that don't, let's say, follow those rules are exempt from all this stuff. I think everyone deals with it, but especially if you are a Catholic that's not using birth control. So they set us into this. They put us in this extremely difficult situation, and then essentially blame us if faith slips, or even worse, we lose it entirely. These rules create the environment for this to happen. And I really think these priests, these whoever, ought to take ownership of that, because they don't. They don't take ownership of the very predictable situation they are creating for people and perpetuating. So that's number one. Number two, and I would say I fit firmly in this camp, and I know a lot of people in our community fit in this camp too, in terms of how, let's say, lust or the sexual desires, etc., can destroy faith. Here here's how I think it can, and I know it does for a lot of people, is they see these rules, these restrictions and limitations that don't always make reasonable sense. Maybe they make divine sense, but they don't make reasonable, rational sense. And it can be enough to cause people to throw up their hands and question the entirety of their faith. I could, and I have another poll running if you want to participate in that. It's basically, it asks what category, excuse me, what category of faith issue is the most difficult for you to accept as a Catholic? And I think it's one is sexuality and the sexual stuff. The second one was Mary. I think the third one is heaven, hell, and the fourth one, I don't know if it's other. I think it was other, right? And uh, as you might expect, the overwhelming majority of people fall into the category of the sex and intimacy stuff. This this stuff deeply challenges people's faith because it seems very irrational and unrealistic. I say it seems. I'm not saying it is, and I'm not saying any of it's wrong, but to the average person, and not even the average person, the person that actually spends a lot of time thinking and praying and studying this stuff, it it doesn't make sense. And then you get to the point where if this doesn't make sense, if the church might possibly be wrong about this, what else are they wrong about? And I firmly believe, and I know from anecdotal evidence, that people leave the church because of this, and people refuse to join the church because of this. In not insignificant amounts. It is a very real issue. And so, yes, people are losing their faith, but I don't think it's because lust, in the very broad perspective, broad sense of the word, is toxic, but it can be. But more so that it can very much erode your confidence in the institution of our faith, because we don't have the luxury as Catholics to pick and choose what we accept. That's the Protestant thing. Well, you know what? I understand why there are Protestants, because they would rather accept 90% of the faith that they can wholeheartedly agree with and be part of the faith, rather than be excluded or exclude themselves over the 1% that they just cannot accept. We are an all or nothing people. We are an all or nothing religion. And I think that is I think that is both a feature and a bug. I understand and appreciates why I'm Catholic, and I remain Catholic, and I fully expect to always be Catholic. That completeness is attractive compared to the alternatives, but it is also, I think, its greatest vulnerability, because people feel like they are compelled. Sometimes you're told just to leave. How many times I get told so many times, why are you even Catholic when you have this one particular issue? Yeah. Like, why is your first instinct to push people away so that it becomes, instead of becoming comprehensive, it feels very exclusive and limited to those people who, for one reason or another, can just kind of put their heads down, accept it all, not really give it a second of thought, and go through their life. I used to be able to do that. I can't anymore. I used to be able to just put my head down, and I didn't even have to try. It just came naturally because I really didn't question things. But now that I do have some very deep-seated questions, I live with this stress. And it's not for a lack of desire. It's not for a lack. I probably want to make sense of this more than anyone, almost, which is why I talk about these things. It's why I podcast and tweet and discuss, because I think it is important, and I want this to make sense. But it's not going to make. I can't will it to make sense. That doesn't happen. It either does or it doesn't, and then you just live with the product of your mind. And so people are losing their faith because of what I think are, you know, sort of extreme positions of, I'm going to just say, popes and doctors of the church. I'm not even going to say church, because I think there's genuine question about how much of this actually is the deposit of faith. So I want people to understand how much this stuff does in fact influence your faith and your confidence in the faith. And what we should stop doing is just blaming everyone who loses their faith or finds their faith weakened. Stop blaming them and recognize what is causing this, and have some sympathy, have some empathy, invite them in, listen to them. Do not cast them away to despair, because that's what tends to happen. So, wow, I really got wound up about that. But I really think this is an important issue, and I understand where this priest is coming from, and I understand where the Matt Frads and the Christopher West and where the world. I understand where they're coming from, but I think they are intentionally or unintentionally putting on blinders, shifting the blame to people, to the world, to the devil, rather than taking full ownership of the consequences of of what we purport to believe as Catholics. I think we need to just take ownership of things. Even if nothing changes, take ownership of the fact that people, for the most part, are genuine, are trying, and despite their efforts, despite their trying, find themselves falling in one, white way or another, whether it's morally or intellectually or whatever. So I want to throw that out there. Appreciate anyone who listened to this. Obviously, leave your comments below if you have any thoughts on this. But I really do feel passionate about this, and I think we need to. I think we need to draw attention to this phenomenon, and I genuinely and sincerely hope the church, from the most conservative trads to the most liberal of liberals, I wish people would approach this in help and support people rather than pushing them away. So that's enough for that video. I appreciate you guys for watching and supporting my channel. And until next time, everyone, have a good one.